Okay, it's starting. And I just wanted to make certain, because a couple people couldn't come today. Andy's not here, and Mary Catherine had a meeting with Wendy, so the two of them aren't here. Princess isn't here, and I don't know where Magdalene is. So we'll make certain that they watch this, because I think it's a great presentation. And should I make you a co-host, Peter? Do you need, you're on mute.
As long as I can share screen, so I think that's fine. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Okay.
Mm.
So, I think that everyone knows one another, but maybe through our question and answer period, we'll get to know each other in a different way. So I'd really like to turn it over to you, Peter, and get as much from you as we possibly can.
Marilyn, you're on mute.
Could I just ask you to ask everyone to put themselves on mute, because there's background noise from some people. Thank you.
Sure. Marilyn, could you tell me roughly how long we've got in the session, and roughly how long you'd like for Q&A?
Sorry, I put myself on mute upon direction from Marilyn. I think that, 30 minutes or so, which would give us another 20 for question and answer, if that is okay with you.
Yeah.
But please feel free to adjust it any way you want.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Well, listen, I really appreciate this opportunity. It's always empowering to be heard, and to find people that want to listen and that are enthusiastic about listening, because it's fairly niche, I think, this area, and especially people who feel themselves empowered to be able to act at this level. So it's really great to be here. So just to give some background, my name is Peter Anderson. I'm based in Swansea in Wales, and I'm the founder of an organisation called VocalEyes Democracy, and it's a C.I.C, which is a community interest company, social enterprise. I came to this space by originally setting up an organisation called VocalEyes with an L back in 2003. So I've been at this for far too long, 18 years. But all along the journey, people have said, it's the elephant in the room, it's a no-brainer to do this sort of thing, but actually implementing it and finding the funding and the structure and doing all the work that's actually needed to implement a system change project, which is essentially what we're endeavoring to do, is obviously a massive piece of work. And we have been like most other social enterprises for a very long time with next to no money, so we've been working in a very sort of agile way. But we're hoping that what's coming up now, because I've been attempting to raise significant funding for a system change project for most of this period, and only now over the last sort of 2 or 3 months have we actually succeeded in that. So it's taken me 18 years to raise these funds, but we've got a crowdfunder now on ETHEX, ETHEX.org.uk. And that's been running for almost 2 months, and it looks like we'll hit our target of £350,000 by the end of this month. So, I'm really pleased. That's a sort of seed funding amount of money as far as a tech startup is concerned, and we're very much a tech startup in the social space. If I don't know, hands up if you've seen Social Dilemma on Netflix. No one seen Social Dilemma? Okay. This sets really important context. So can I ask you to note that down and watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix? The other really important context is David Attenborough's witness statement. Anyone seen that? One. Okay, there's another one. So those two films, films really on Netflix set the context for really the problems that we're trying to achieve here at VocalEyes. So The Social Dilemma talks about its interviews with CEOs from social media organizations like Facebook and Twitter, and they're basically apologizing for what they've created, because they realize that the entire power of artificial intelligence is being harnessed through social media platforms like Facebook to suck you in and draw you in with the most compelling content. But this is in most cases, the most useless content. You know, so it might be, to me, it might be trying to show me Ultimate Fighting Championship, or, you know, people riding motorbikes across the Grand Canyon, or something like this, right? Really compelling, but almost useless. And they do that to draw you in so that they can show you adverts, so that they can make money for their shareholders. So anyone who's been successful in the social media place gets into this juxtaposition between their social mission and obviously raising finance, and the raising money for their organization usually wins over their social mission. So we're trying to do things differently in terms of, we try to raise money in a social space, and we've raised the funds through a bond offer. So they are social investors, and so they essentially get a return on investment every year, and then they get their principal back at the end of the term. So we're not going to be in that position that as we become more and more successful, that our shareholders are going to be driving us to make more profit. All our shareholders want to see us succeed in our social mission. So I just thought I'd lay that out in terms of where we are in the journey. So what are we actually trying to do? We're trying to create a system change project, going to many conferences, you know, 10 years or so ago with Satish Kumar, Vandana Shiva, Jonathan Porritt, these sorts of people, really setting out the environmental problems, financial problems, social problems, and they would always refer to local democracy and community empowerment being the answer to local and global issues. And after I'd heard that so many times 10 years or so ago, I asked myself, well, who is trying to solve this problem of local democracy, and what answers are there? And when you look out there, it's kind of a void. And I couldn't find anyone who's actually trying to create a system change project to make local democracy great again, dare I say. It's not again, because it's never been great, but to really engage people in local democracy, it's just a void. And we've just had elections here in the UK, and we've been using a piece of paper and a pencil, right? So this whole thing around local democracy, we know it's really, really important, but there's no app. Of all the millions of apps on our phones, there's no app for local democracy on any of our phones. So that's kind of the elephant in the room and the big void that needs to be filled. And the question is, who's going to build this app, this technology for local democracy? And we don't want to just stop at local democracy, right? Because local democracy is establishing a voice in communities and schools and organizations, to democratizing them. But that creates a set of priorities, but we want to go all the way in closing the feedback loop in terms of being able to move those priorities through to actions and outcomes. So what we've ended up doing is building a suite of community organizing tools to support that whole process. So I just share some screens now. So VocalEyes is the tool. This is a 30-second video that you may have already seen. I'll just play it just to set some context on what those tools do.
VocalEyes, an innovative platform for community organizing.
Here's how. Create a group, start topics of conversation, promote to your community, encourage them to suggest, rate and debate ideas. This creates clear priorities. Organize regular meetings, set agendas from your priorities, form working groups, crowdsource projects, share the best projects so they can be discovered, adapted and replicated anywhere. Tap into the wisdom of your communities. Turn great ideas into action.
There we are. So let's squeeze into 30 seconds what VocalEyes is, and in a real context, just giving you, I want to give you two examples, one in a geographic ward, how that can be applied, and the other in schools. So essentially, over the last 10 years, I've been building these tools and the service that wraps around them in a very agile way, and then gaining case studies in a whole range of organizations, from housing associations, colleges, universities. And so a few years ago, Swansea Council stumped up some funds to prove this model inside geographic wards. So when you join VocalEyes, it takes your postcode and it actually joins you to your ward. There are 10,000 wards in the country, and the ward is the basis of democracy in the United Kingdom. Wards is actually used in many other countries in Africa and stuff like that. Obviously in the United States, you'll have different democratic boundaries, but that's what it is at the heart of democracy in the UK. And if you ask people which ward they live in, most people don't know. or if they have tried to engage in local politics, they become very frustrated with it. So here's an example of us, of what it looks like inside Pennard community. And we were able to fund a community organizer here for 2 years. And they drove the engagement through digital means, through face-to-face means, through tea and cake and communicate, they used to call it, down the local library. So a whole range of different engagement strategies. And on the iPriorities tab here, residents can clearly see what the priorities of their community are. So this really is base number one, for community voice, is what are our priorities? And most communities and groups and organizations don't know what their priorities are. So it makes it very difficult to organize and take anything forward. And when we do organize engagement events, quite often they are just littered with post-it notes, big sheets of paper, big sheets of paper on the wall, or paper tablecloths. And then some poor person obviously has to wrap that up, and I'm sure many of you have done this, right? Put it in the back of your car, and you've got to go write it up in a Word document, and then you're going to try and circulate that to 150 email addresses that are written on a piece of paper with lots of typos and things like this. And then I might receive that Word document a few months later, and where do we go from there? So that process is the process we currently use for engagement, and is obviously incredibly antiquated. So we're trying to create something that is a live conversation that identifies what our priorities are, but also shows us who are the people that are going to carry these priorities forward into a working group. So here in Pennard, the top priority is a skate park. 191 people have engaged. You can see I can rate this. I can also pledge to be involved if I actually want to be a volunteer on a volunteer team, and I can have a conversation about this, and I can post comments for and against and neutral. So on every idea, there's a discussion going on inside the team. Then I can actually see who's pledged to be part of the volunteer team. And as an administrator, I can just click this button here and copy their email addresses to clipboard, and then organize an event with those people who have stepped up to take it forward. And let's say, for instance, now we're in a meeting with those 3 people, we're coming up with an action plan, and I can then add actions to this idea in terms of what are we going to do next. We're going to apply for funding, we're going to create posters, we're going to do whatever, and those can be assigned to whoever's in that group. So it moves from engagement through to volunteer teams, through to sort of project management. And then as the things start to happen, you can add news items as outcomes. So this is an example of the priorities here: Pennard Community Hub, sports clubs for girls and women, and cycle-wide networks and things like that. They actually went, in the second year of using it, they went to the next stage. I could see how powerful it was, and they started using it for participatory budgeting. So they essentially put budgets up that didn't exist previously for the local residents to prioritise how that money was to be spent. So they allocated £5,000 to an environmental budget, and they spent that money in line with the priorities coming out of the ideas section. So you can see that's where the money comes in. You can see that they spent £165 on litter pickers, and they did that because the residents prioritised that in the engagement section. And here you can see drinking fountains, and then obviously in the news items you can actually see those fountains actually being installed and action. So you've kind of got the full feedback loop in a sense, just in that screenshot there of the ideas being suggested, prioritised, the funding being allocated, and the outcomes. So that gives you a sense, and each one of these modules sort of supports a different type of activity. You've got participatory budgeting, you've got the questions that are being asked, and then you've got the ideas, which are the priorities, voting on motions. So that might be, in an AGM or something a lot more serious, time-bound voting of motions. Projects is crowdsourcing. So if we need 20 people to set up a yoga group or to start a litter picking project, then we can set up projects there and ask for commitment. Actions is the stuff that's happening, and news is the good news stories that have happened. So they're the tools that are on there at the moment. Another contract we got was with Cardiff Council, because they wanted to get a UNICEF badge, and they needed to show that they were having authentic engagement with young people across the city. And they were going to use SurveyMonkey, which is timed out. But we convinced them that there was a better way and that we could actually make local democracy and community organising available to all the schools. So there are 120 schools in Cardiff. So we set all of those up, groups for every single one of them. So this page is like a leaderboard then for those schools. So you can kind of see an overview here of the interactions. So in this secondary school here, almost, well, I say 45% of the students have engaged. They've created 150 ideas, 16,000 interactions, 700 pledges. And some of these schools here, the primary schools, are almost 100% engagement, and that's because they use it on a weekly basis or regular basis to underpin either English literacy or digital competency. And so they're using it as part of the curriculum. And so for any of these schools, again, we can jump in and we're into the same type of group and we can see what their priorities are and who's opted in to do whatever. So that gives you an example of community voice and what we call youth voice or student voice. Then you can see here there's a button, Discover Great Ideas. So what we're trying to do is, instead of just having a blank canvas where people would start from scratch in terms of suggesting ideas, that we actually create a repository of case studies of things that those particular schools or communities or whatever have done in the past, of success stories, to inspire those conversations. Because as you know, people don't know what they don't know, but when they see something, they might be inspired to do that. So going plastic free, for instance, is often not something that a student would think of, but as soon as you show it to them, it's like, yeah, we definitely want to do that. Or things like urban farming and stuff like that. Loads of inspirational ideas out there that people wouldn't necessarily suggest in a consultation event, but if they see it as an inspirational idea, then they can then use that. And that's kind of one of the issues right now, is that if I go to TED, or I'm sure you're all familiar with TED, and you watch an inspirational video there, and then you click on share, what are the options under share? The options are really only to share into social media. And where does it go from there, right? You're only ever going to get likes and a few comments. It's not going to make that idea happen. What we're trying to do is create another option where you can share that idea into a social community organizing platform, which is really action media rather than social media, and where then the residents or the members of the group get a ping and they're prioritizing it, they're opting into working groups, and then there's resources there to support that working group actually bring that to fruition. And so alongside that, our highest sort of aspiration at the moment really is then to join those working groups up in coordinated collective action across the country. Because what we know from the engagement that we've done is that similar types of groups have similar priorities. So almost all geographic communities, for instance, we've engaged, want to do some sort of community gardening project, right? They're growing projects. They want to do rooftop solar or local energy projects. So there's obviously a lot of that is happening, but totally in silo, right? And we know the in silo issue is a big problem for people. So can we join together those working groups who have opted into similar projects across the country, and so that they don't just get an inspiration of connecting to local people to make it happen locally, but they're getting the inspiration that actually we're making this happen with 100 other groups across the country, and this is our impact. So that's kind of the journey that we're on, is trying to create the tools, the platform, the supporting services and resources that communities and groups and working groups need to be able to succeed in whatever it is they prioritized and want to do. We've kind of, with the Youth Voice, we've tried to package that up as a Youth Voice in Action service, and we've got that up and running to a certain degree in Swansea, and we've got a project running in Nottingham at the moment. So we see that as a sort of specific sort of service in a sense, which is youth engagement across schools and youth organisations. The ambition being to identify what the priorities are of every school or every youth organisation in that area. So we're making really good progress on that, and Nottingham are sort of trailblazing that in a sense. Obviously they're trying to level up on what Cardiff have done, and I just wanted to share this with you. They're actually running their first, what we call a democracy day today. Sometimes we call them democracy days, if you can imagine going into a primary school and asking every single child what their priorities are. It's pretty crazy, but that's what we do. And so this has literally just happened today. So I'm looking at this with you. And the top priority coming out of C.I.C Primary School is a yes day. The teachers can only say yes for the day. I just thought, isn't that fantastic? I think these kids, you know, are year 5, year 6. I just thought that was a brilliant idea. And then on the team here, we can see that there's 55 young pupils that have opted into the working group that want to help make that happen. So you can see what the next action is. It just needs a small amount of capacity from a teacher or someone in that school to bring those 55 students together, whether that's online or face-to-face. And it's like, what are we going to do next? What's our action plan? Log the actions on here and let's crack on with it. Okay. So that gives you a flavor. Extra break for lunch, right? That might look like a self-indulgent idea, but it actually says, so we can have 10 minutes to play with all the teachers in that year, playing with the children too. So I thought that was a really nice idea as well. And again, 36. So that gives you a reality sort of, you know, a sense of how it actually feels to identify what the priorities are in a school. Because in a sense, democracy fails at that point for the first time in a primary school, right? And it just gets worse and worse as you go through secondary schools, colleges, universities, and then we have almost zero expectations then when we come to our geographic communities, because we haven't been engaged in democracy throughout our education. So this gives you a flavour for how democracy can be transformed with the youngest age group. So what we've done now is try to package that up as a sort of citywide offering, and we're calling that a participatory city. And the ambition of the participatory city is to quite simply establish a community voice in all wards and a youth voice in all schools, right? Because that's base number one. And if you do manage to achieve that to any degree, you will get all the data that is needed to be able to then move forward in lots of other projects, right? You'll have the evidence of need from those individual communities, but you'll also be able to see the trends across communities. So here in Swansea, there's 36 communities. If you manage to achieve that, you would see that, you know, 10 out of the 36 all want to do rooftop solar, and 20 out of them want to do growing projects. And you can use that as evidence of need then to raise further funds or to encourage the council or whoever it is that's got capacity to make things happen. And obviously all of this data can then start to inform the elected representatives who have zero data, right? Most representatives have very little idea of what the people want, who they represent. So we can start to turn, it's kind of cart before the horse at the moment. We very much look to representatives to do things for us. And this might, you know, the aim of this is to turn things back round where the communities are in control of what they want and the elected representatives are there to support that activity. So Josh and I have been working on this new presentation, and we're currently talking with Leeds about that. The way that we see this working is you'd have a catalyst organisation inside a city, and that they would learn about the participatory city model, and then they would try to engage a consortium of what you might call community anchor organisations. The community anchor organisations are those that have got the relationships with the local people. So that would be the Council for Voluntary Services, the local council itself. Build a consortium and then decide what level of engagement do we want to go for in the first instance, and then essentially crowdsource those resources. In some cases, funding would be required to pay for the positions. In other cases, the councils or the CVS or whoever will already have people in place. So Swansea has already got 2 community enablers. Nottingham's got community organisers that are willing to be trained up in this methodology. So we don't necessarily, or they're not necessarily going to have to raise funds to make this happen. So I'll just whiz through this. The whole point is to try to enable coordinated collective action across the city, to discover and co-create the replication of proven solutions. And just on that point, we're just about to put live this solutions repository. So this is the DNA at the center of the story. So what are the projects that we actually want people to organize around? So here in this repository, we've managed to collate 50 environmental solutions. So it's broken down into challenges, solutions, and case studies. So let's say, for instance, how can we reduce our environmental impact? And under there, you've got the solutions. Inside each solution, you've got what it is, why do it, and then resources. And then you've also got links to case studies as to who's also done that. And in the longer term, we can see these case studies being localized. So that's at the center of the story, to inspire the conversations. And then we enable the community organizing, or the democratic engagement, and then the community organizing, and then support the working groups. So that repository is actually just on environmental solutions at the moment. It was paid for by Swansea Environmental Forum over the last 9 months. We're looking for funding now to do a similar thing, but for well-being solutions. Most ideas tend to fall within either the environmental sphere or the well-being sphere. So that's a piece of work that we'd like to co-create with any of you in the future. And Sue Cooper has kindly, sort of stepped up on that one to help lead that and bring together volunteers who can offer content. But we are in need of some funding to actually coordinate that content. So to inspire a generation where participation is the norm and build capacity to inspire communities. We've got the repository of wellbeing and environmental projects. So how would it work? The participatory city model would essentially define work streams. You'll all be familiar with large European projects or big applications to something like the big lottery, where you might be looking for several £1 million worth of funding. Essentially, what we're talking about here is an agile method of doing that. So define that big project, which might be the participatory city and community engagement, community voice across the city, youth voice across the city, and break that down into work streams, and then find local organizations that are prepared or whose mission aligns with the different work streams, and then support those organizations to apply for funding. And so that's essentially what we've been doing in Nottingham. So as an example, one of the work streams in Nottingham was Youth Voice in Action. The partner that we identified was Positively Empowered Kids. The action plan was to develop the youth voice across the city. We then supported them to apply for funding to the Nottingham Community Foundation. They got that funding within 4 weeks, and now they're in the process of implementing that work stream. And I've just showed you C.I.C, which is one of the outcomes from that. They're now applying for another 10K so that they can do coordinated action across a multiple range of schools. So they're probably going to go for around 10 schools next before they scale up to all the schools in the city. But you can imagine work streams for a participatory city. I'm sure you've all got your own ideas about what that might be, and part of that may be around developing compassionate communities, or listening to minority voices, or trying to engage third sector groups or things like that. So the key question here is, obviously a lot of people have been in this space for a long time trying to transform communities, but there's been very little investment there. There's been very little money to actually make anything happen. So one of the real sort of nettles that we're trying to grasp is, how do we generate a sustainable revenue stream that's going to pay for the capacity in these cities to keep that working? Because what's not been prioritized is capacity for community organizing. And even where there is capacity for community organizing, it's not coupled with a digital platform and all the services to actually make that really, really effective. You might be familiar with, in the UK, Locality, for instance. Hands up if you're familiar with Locality in the UK. There we are. They actually put out or employed community organizers in every district in the country, and that was their big society agenda, right? But one community organizer in one district covering several 100,000 people is just not good enough, right? Every community needs access to a community organizer. We just needs, they had the right idea, but it needs to be massively scaled up and localized. So in terms of creating revenue streams, we see that we could be approaching impact investors and high net worth individuals in the cities, so they could be celebrities or whatever, who want to make their city a better place to live. And they could be investing not just into a social enterprise where they see that money disappear, but they could actually be investing in bonds, like what we've done with our fundraising here. This is ethics, and we're trying to raise 350,000. So this is a bond, and so you could be creating a bond for Nottingham or Leeds or anywhere where you live, and you could be approaching high net worth individuals saying, invest in this bond. We'll show you that money having impact directly in the city, and you can tell us if you want to roughly how you'd like to see that spent. You're going to get a 5% return on that investment, and you're going to get your money back at the end of 5 years. So as well as seeing the impact, they also see it as a rational investment, if you're with me, right? So that's just one way of, and I know talking about money is not really what we want to do in the community space, but it's sort of key to sustaining something for over the long term. So another revenue stream is through corporate social responsibility, and partly that's businesses sponsoring projects. So obviously VocalEyes is very good at identifying and establishing what the priorities are in the schools or in the geographic groups or in the communities, so we can be engaging in the business sector to sponsor those, to pay for the trees, to pay for the benches, to pay for whatever it is. And obviously they get some marketing and some promotion in response for that. And the other CSR aspect is where organisations like Freeths, for instance, who we're talking with in Nottingham, they're a network of law firms throughout the country. They have asked their staff to allocate a certain amount of volunteer hours per year. So they've got capacity to actually go out there into the community and help plant those trees or do that work. So CSR comes in a few different packages, a few different types. Stakeholder engagement contracts is the sort of business aspect. You've got housing associations, colleges, you've got universities, you've got local authorities. They've all got stakeholders. They've got students, tenants, staff, where in most cases they're trying to improve engagement with their stakeholders and they don't necessarily know how. And so we can sell contracts to them, and those contracts, the money and the profit from those contracts can then go towards the social mission, which is supporting the communities without a budget, the geographic communities, the third sector groups, schools, to do engagement as well. And then crowdfunding and regular donations. And we see potentially citizens paying on a regular direct debit and being able to see that money go into a central pot in an open and transparent way, and then the money being allocated to priorities. So there are 4 ways that we see potentially, generating sustainable revenue streams. So I've kind of gone through these slides here without showing you them, but anyway, targeted and partner investors, the CSR aspect, the stakeholder engagement of improving participatory engagement, and then empowering businesses, empowering communities, and then the Earth citizenship piece, which is a bit of a kite flying exercise at the moment. But anyone who's familiar with Vandana Shiva here, hands up if you're familiar with Vandana Shiva. She's written several books on Earth citizenship, and I know Marilyn Hamilton does a lot of work with Vandana, and I'm really hoping that we can have a conversation with her in the near future to offer a potential mechanism on how we might bring the idea of being an Earth citizen into a reality and actually offer a model. And in my imagination, it would be a very simple thing, even a one-page website where I sign up as an Earth citizen. Many of you may already be Earth protectors, for instance. Polly Higgins, any Earth protectors here? Yeah, so a bit like that, but with there being a bit more commitment and follow through. So you'd contribute time to projects, you would provide compassionate support to other people who have contributed. So that really brings the well-being aspect and the compassionate aspect, which I've personally learned through the being involved with the Nottingham group on how important that is. And having the meditation, for instance, at the beginning and the end of these sessions, and having people who are heart focused inside these sessions makes such a big difference to working groups. So you're not just talking about what it is we need to do and when we need to do it. You've got people there that are actually looking after your well-being, which is quite transformative for most people, and makes makes you well up when you're not expecting it. And obviously a financial contribution. So that's again a bit of a kite flying exercise there, but we're hoping that that will be on the agenda in the near future. So I know I'm almost up to half an hour here, but so I've said how we would get started: identify a catalyst organisation, build together a consortium of organisations that are enthusiastic about seeing this happen across their city, with many cities having declared climate emergency. And on top of that, now they've got all these well-being priorities because of the pandemic. There's a lot of cities that are, and local authorities, for instance, that are really challenged with how do we actually engage the wider community. We know Swansea Council, for instance, has declared climate emergency. The only real outcomes they promote are the things that they've got control of. So that is changing the cars to electric cars, changing their electricity to green electricity, what they can do with their staff and their buildings. What they're not really talking about is the much bigger issue and their much bigger responsibility of how they change the behaviour of all the people that they represent in their city. That really stumps them. And even if there's a will, and there is in many cases a will to make a change, the tools just don't exist for them to be able to make that happen. And that's, you know, one of the key things that we're trying to do here is provide more capacity and tools to bring that about. So, and then, like, who would you need to recruit? You really need someone who's a coordinator or a manager of the project to promote it and also drive the revenue stream. So someone who's sort of commercially focused at the higher level to make sure that those revenue streams are continuous, because obviously we all know without those, you know, we're not going to have a sustainable project. Then you have the community organisers who are doing the democratic engagement, trying to build up the voice in the communities and the schools and the organisations, and then have someone specifically focused on action, because quite often we get to the point of priorities, but we're not able then to turn that into outcomes, which is obviously the real frustration for many projects. So having someone who really understands all of those templates and what people need to do to be able to move that through to an action, and obviously then to link up the similar working groups so that they can all learn from each other and peer mentor each other. So marketing, PR, tools and training, ongoing support. So there, I've got the job definitions in there, and then, you know, I put in some sort of levels really. This is a very new presentation, so this hasn't really worked up to a great deal, but I thought I'd just show it to you anyway, because it's a sort of our latest thinking. You know, people need something to aim for. So let's say we're talking to Leeds, they build together a consortium, they might say, well, we want to go for level 3, and essentially level 3 means all of these people on 3 days a week, right? And that's how much it's going to cost. We're going to need to raise 83 grand if we want to pay for these 3 types of people for 3 days a week. And as I say, you're not necessarily going to have to raise that money, because some of those people might already be in post and they can be assigned to it. So I'll stop there, just over time, but hopefully that gives you a flavour for what we're attempting to do. And yeah, look forward to questions.
Yes, I mean, you can use your hand or just speak up. And if you don't, I will. So with people who are here, I know we have some people who have experience already with VocalEyes and others who are hearing about it for the first time. And so it would be great we don't have much time, we only have 14 minutes, but just to hear the questions, I think, and then perhaps those who are involved with VocalEyes could give the answers and through their own experience. So we could pause and wait for people to think, but you know, Peter, it looks to me like this is a marvelous tool for a community, a city, or as you said, a school. So you know, as I was watching this, I was thinking of, you know, many of our really great compassionate cities. There's Charlie there in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Heather in the UK. Jan just joining up with the Oxford group, of how you can really put these projects that some of them have already started and really be able to communicate online with one another, do all the things that are part of the platform. And something came up about a youth group. Like, for example, the charter for the last year has had a youth group. It's international, lots of youth between the ages of 15 to about 30. And they're going to be planning a conference. And so I was wondering, geez, you know, how do we connect up with just youth groups? Could VocalEyes help with something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you, in the same way that you saw the schools listed there, you could, or we could basically import all the youth groups that you're talking about, and we could then provide train the trainer training. So each youth group identifies a participatory team. That might be 1 or 2 or 3 people in each youth group that's going to carry the engagement and to be the community organisers. And we support them to do the engagement, just like we've trained, you know, PEC to engage this other school. So then they go ahead and engage their own stakeholders, so the young people in their own groups initially, to get a first-hand experience and develop a set of priorities inside each one of those youth organisations. And from that point, you know, you're going to get priorities. You'll be able to see that from that leader table. You're going to be able to see, well, these ones are really going for it, and these ones haven't done anything at all. So, you know, obviously with the ones that are really going for it, you can support them to move ideas through to actions, and the ones that aren't doing anything at all, you can provide more support and see what the barriers are with them. And then ultimately, you know, try to look at, well, actually there's similar priorities across 10 of these groups. All these 10 want to do X, Y, and Z. They want, I don't know, learning on compassionate C.I.C training or whatever it is, right? And well, we can provide that all together. So we can provide that training on a regular course, maybe, you know, every fortnight on a Monday morning or whatever it is. So as I was saying, starting to build in some efficiency, so we're not all doing it in silo or doing similar projects in silo.
Yeah. Gosh, Heather, I'm thinking of all the things that you've been involved with, and how this could be such a good tool. You're on mute.
Yes, it could be. Yes, it could be. Yeah, I need to go away and act, have some discernment, talk to people. Peter, who would I talk to first? School leaders? Counsellors?
Depends what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, well, yes. So, yeah.
What do you want to happen?
Well, at the moment, youth is not on Compassionately Portsmouth radar. Things like loneliness are, and good neighbours are. So we could maybe adapt your project for that.
Yeah, well, sort of dealing with loneliness and being compassionate neighbours are sort of projects, right? They're ideas that people might want to prioritise and opt into. So all of that, it all comes from asking the question and reaching out and doing the engagement. And really, this was my message to transition towns. You know, when that came forward, Rob Hopkins, you know, and I was with Rob Hopkins presenting in the early days of Transition Towns, if you've heard of that organisation. And you know, they kind of came at it from this point of, we need to engage people around environmental issues, and we need to tell them what the environmental issues are. And I was trying to say, you don't need to tell anybody anything about environmental issues. You just need to enable a community voice. And when you enable a community voice, they prioritize, we want organic produce at our local shop. We want to go plastic free. We want to plant trees. They'll tell you that if you just ask them. Right, you don't need to go at them with an environmental nature or a well-being nature. Just need to facilitate the voice. But as you say, we can create a set of templates that would inspire people to suggest things that they might not know about. So as you say, being a compassionate neighbour might not be something that springs to people's mind, but if it's there as a template that people can browse through and go, actually, that looks really interesting, watch the case study of how they did that somewhere else, go, yeah, I'd love to see that happen in my community. And then with one click, they can share that into their group, and then everybody can discover this compassionate neighbours idea and prioritise it or not, and opt into a working group or not. And then, you know, you could then support those people to implement that project, however it works.
Charlie, go ahead. You're
Yeah.
on, there you go.
Yeah, Peter, I'm excited about this. While you were talking, I registered on VocalEyes and went through the little tutoring that you have, and it's pretty exciting. And I think maybe help me with this, but maybe a first step would be, number one, to join it, and number two is to really take a look at what some communities are doing with this and the mechanism. I can just see where it could be really helpful to Compassionate DFW with our 3 cities, where we've got individuals within those cities that are doing some pretty exciting stuff. But this seems to be a platform that would really help to bring people together, the ideas, and then being able to go through the process as you so beautifully described. So I'm excited about it. I don't know how far we'll take it, but
Yeah.
it's yeah.
And what really excited me about the Charter for Compassion, and what I've learned through working with Sue and the people in Nottingham, is just how important this compassionate element is. And as you're all aware, you know, you talk to any working group that has been in an environmental project like the Transition Towns, they've all burnt out. Right? Generally, they've chosen some really valid projects, setting up farmers markets or whatever, a solar project. 3 years later, they're exhausted, and the project just burns out. But I believe that if you can add in that element of compassion and well-being, then those working groups are going to last longer, and they're going to enjoy the journey a lot longer, rather than, as I say, just being totally focused really on the mission. Being focused on the themselves and their own personal well-being at the same time. So, you know, that's where I come back to that Earth citizenship piece, right? It's like, well, we're going to pledge into projects, but we're also going to provide compassionate support. And that's where I thought there's potentially a really nice sort of yin-yang dovetailing here, where I've been focused on the sort of action side of things, but we need to look after people as well and focus on the well-being side of things. And that's how I thought that together these things could scale throughout the world as Earth citizens. So people opt in to be Earth citizens and do those 2 things.
Marilyn, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, Charles, we haven't met, but it might seem rather strange that from Findhorn, Scotland, I can put you in touch with somebody who's an hour and a half north of you. I work with Durant, Oklahoma. I was just speaking to them on Friday. And as Peter was going through this, I was saying to myself, wow, they've now come to a place where this would be very useful for them. So if you can see through the American eyes that this would be useful for DFW, then I may be able to give you somebody who's been working for close to 8 years with a compassionate lens in developing Durant.
Wonderful. Please do. Please do.
Yeah, I'll connect through Marilyn T. The other thing I wanted to say was, Peter, this is really exciting to see the way you put it together in this presentation. So Marilyn, I am going to look for this recording because I have a list of 10 people here in Findhorn that I would like to see this, plus a few others. Because for those of you who may not know, Findhorn is really trying to recover from both the economy loss because of the pandemic. So we're having to reinvent ourselves. So all the questions that Peter is asking is, I can imagine us having to go through appreciative inquiry and visioning and having some way to collect the actionable possibilities is going to be very useful. So I would really like to be able to share this with them. Yeah, so thank you. I could go on at several other ideas, but yeah, I think this is really, really great.
Maybe I could just add as well that I don't want to raise expectations that by signing up to VocalEyes that it's going to fix everybody's problems, right? I don't want to over egg what VocalEyes is. But we need a system change project, right? We all know we need that, and it's going to take time. If you think about the resources that Amazon's put into creating the Amazon website and that platform, right? It took them 10 years to sort of break even, and many millions, if not billions of dollars were invested in that platform just to make the capability of buying online a reality. What we're talking about is potentially as complicated, if not more complicated, right? To enable self-organizing communities everywhere, coordinated collective action. So this is just the potentially the beginning with this seed funding. So really the question is, are you up for the journey? It's not are you up for using VocalEyes? It's like, are you up for the journey of a system change project where we co-create this thing together? Because we know we're going to get there. Like, just like Jeff Bezos knew he was going to get to that point where he's got this amazing platform, and it might take 10 years. No one else was trying to do it because he was the only one who actually started on that journey and was bold enough to go on it. No one else is going to build a democratic community organizing infrastructure for the United Kingdom or anywhere else, right? But if we get together, we actually set our minds on it, we know we are going to get there. Even in its current form, VocalEyes can provide some of that, right, in terms of the basics of it, and it can only get better and better up to a point where it's actually a really good user experience, right? So that's really a big core question, I think, is for people. It's not whether they want to use VocalEyes, but are they up for a system change project?
We're going to leave the last words to Joshua, but I just wanted to say that we will get the recording out as soon as we can within the next day or two. But the other thing is that it would be, I'm hoping that all the people who couldn't come today would have a chance to look at this, and that we might continue the conversation with brainstorming the next time that we meet. And, you know, Peter, if you're willing to join us again next month, you know, I think that would be really wonderful, because, you know, I'd like to explore the possibilities beyond what we've been able to see and hear today. And is there a way that you might make available? Was that a PowerPoint that you used, or you just had it all on your computer? And...
Yeah, no problem. I can share all the links that I've shared today.
That would be great. Okay, and Joshua, I'm turning it over to you, and you can lead us out as well.
Okay, well, I was just going to echo what Peter was saying, really, that it's really about, it's not about, you know, changing the world instantly. It's a process that in terms of a complexity approach, we're trying to create a conducive environment that will allow solutions to emerge. In Leeds, what we're doing is we've got a culture change project, which is the Festival of Kindness, Compassion and Wellbeing. And out of that, I met Peter, and out of that, I met Sue, and particular projects are engaging with it. So it's a process, and finding the right level at which to engage for each context is important, because it's got to be locally based, and it's not got to be something that's going to overwhelm anybody who's involved. But I think it's got incredible potential, and I'd encourage anyone to engage with it where you can.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Peter. It really was a wonderful presentation. And I think there's so much for us to continue exploring. Thanks, everyone. And
Thanks very much indeed.
And we'll see you next month, hopefully. Take care.
Thanks, Marilyn. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.